Welcome to the Career Change Diaries podcast with me, Alice Stapleton. And this month we have a very special guest in the form of Maude Burger-Smith. Hi, Maude. How are you?
I'm excited to be your special guest for the month. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. So I did my somatic coaching course with Maude recently, and I was very inspired by some of the content that we covered. And if you follow me on social media, you'll see that this is my latest interest and something that I'm wanting to focus my coaching on a little bit more. So I thought it would be great to get Maude on the podcast to talk a little bit more about somatic coaching and her own career change. So Maude is currently a leadership and burnout prevention coach and consultant. And you were 15 years in corporate before that. Is that right?
I was indeed. So it feels really nice to be here talking from two angles, the work that I do now and also being part of career changing, which is the work that you do in the world. So excited to be here to talk to both.
And what role were you doing for corporates previously?
A bit of a mixed role. So I worked in global mobility, which is moving people from one country to another, and started off handling individual assignments and helping people to get their legal paperwork and worked my way up through that. And when I left the industry, I was heading up training and development and supply chain management within those departments. So working at a relatively senior level, and really loved the people that I worked with and the work that I did. And it was interesting, that piece of learning and development and training is obviously something that's very closely linked to coaching. So that felt like a thread that continued on.
Yeah, quite a natural progression, I imagine. And so you've been coaching now for 8 years?
Yes. So it's since 2018, which is now 8 years, although it's sometimes hard to believe.
Yeah. Okay. It goes quickly, doesn't it? And so now you also teach certifications in stress and wellness, organizational performance, team and executive support, and obviously somatic modalities, which is how I came across you, and a regular speaker and media contributor. So first of all, let's just dig into that career shift a little bit more. So it sounds like you were slightly on the edge of coaching anyway, but tell me a bit more about why you decided to, I guess, leave corporate, start your own thing. How did that all come about?
It's really interesting because I remember first seeing the words life coach in a newspaper article in 1999 and telling my parents, I was a teenager at the time, telling my parents that I thought I should become a life coach. And they were like, really? You're 16.
Oh,
wow. What are you going to be supporting people with? But there was something about the methodology of supporting people to create change into their future that sounds like it really resonated with me from an early age. So I loved, I had a look at some of your previous conversations and people's transitions and what they had been called to do. And I think there's something often in us from quite early on that feels interesting and evokes some curiosity. So I think the idea of coaching was something that was in me from an early age. What prompted the change at that stage is I got to a relatively senior level and I was working with leaders around the world, business founders of their own organizations. And I was struck by people who had checked the boxes of success. So ticked the got a good job, money in the bank, 2 kids, picket fence kind of dream that we're sold around success, but were really, really stressed, pretty overwhelmed, and not always so happy. And for me, that was an interesting gap to dig into a little bit more. And so I did my first coaching certification while I was working full time. So was studying in the evenings, coaching in the evenings and over weekends, and still working within the role that I had. And obviously a lot of those skills are transferable and usable in both places. So bringing some of that into my management, my leadership, the work that I did. And then when it got to a time where I couldn't handle that anymore. I went down to 4 days a week in the corporate space and working one day, building up my coaching practice. And then it became necessary to kind of make a decision, right, in terms of my own time and energy and capacity. And that's when I went full time into building my own coaching practice. So useful to, I think, always to see how people build a business or make a transition from the behind the scenes. And mine took a couple of years to move over into full-time business ownership. Yeah,
I was going to ask how long that took you. So what, just 2-3 years by the sounds of it?
2 or 3 years. Yeah. So I think about, I started coaching in 2018 and I went full-time into the practice in 2021.
Right. Okay. Well, that's pretty good going, considering you were working quite a lot at the same time. So I think a lot of people get put off about how long it can take, but actually, in the grand scheme of things, that's not that long, I'd say.
It's not that long. And I think also for me, I was a primary breadwinner and a caretaker for my family. So I have dependents that I need to be responsible for. And my nervous system also needed a runway to create change. It needed financial safety to create change. And so to be able to have some time where I could play with my business, where I could experiment with coaching and not have the responsibility for it to need to make money for me was actually a gift that I feel like I gave myself, right? I could make my money from my job. I could experiment with my business, build that up without a huge amount of pressure on it. And I actually really enjoyed that way of transitioning and creating business. So, when you say a lot of people feel like, oh, that takes a long time, I really enjoyed having both. And I often recommend that to people that I'm working with who are working through a career change of give yourself some time to do that.
Yeah, well, and give yourself permission to play around with it. As you say, it can be quite loaded with pressure sometimes. So yeah, giving yourself permission just to be playful and decide what sorts of people, especially in coaching, what sorts of people you like to coach, what type of coaching. Interesting. Okay, so it sounds like you were more drawn towards coaching and it was through intrigue and curiosity as opposed to really not liking what you were doing or being pushed away from what you were currently doing.
I would say that's a good way of putting it. And obviously I have a great friend in Joseph Grech, who is the founder of the company that you and I connected through in terms of a coaching certificate. So I also had somebody in my orbit who had created change in their life, who was doing something that was interesting to me. And that's always really nice when you have people around you who are inspiring and doing their own thing in a way that feels true for you, because growing up, I never wanted to have my own business. That wasn't something that I aspired to. My father was an entrepreneur. He had his own business and it looked really stressful. I was like, that does not look like it's fun. So for me to see people having a business or being self-employed and to see them enjoying that was something that was different to my experience growing up.
Yeah, good to have those role models. Well, I always think it's really interesting in my family, bar the person I married, no one else is employed. They're all self-employed. So I don't know. It was just never even something that I questioned. It's really interesting. I won't go into it, but they all do lots of different things, but very, I don't know, maybe we just don't like being told what to do. I think that's probably the key factor. Okay, so you start your coaching business, and so from day one, it sounds like you were quite interested in why individuals were quite stressed, what was going on with their nervous system. So how did you even come across like somatic work, even that word? That way of approaching things?
Yeah, so interestingly, twofold. When I was in my late teens, early 20s. I was exposed to the Alexander technique. I don't know if you've ever heard of that as a modality, but that is a body-mind technique. And I actually became certified as a practitioner. So that was a 3-year diploma that I did at the same time as my university at the time. So there was this academic way of learning. And then there was the mornings where I was studying mind-body connection as an 18, 19, 20-year-old. So again, a really interesting synergy of that was something that felt important for me, felt necessary, and I wanted to incorporate into my life in some kind of a way. So I didn't practice as a teacher for many years, but there was something about how our mental state impacts our body and vice versa, how our body impacts our mental state, that was interesting to me from very early on. And then the first coaching certification that I did was a year-long certification and spoke to women's health in relationships, in sexuality, their relationship to pleasure, women's cycles. And so somatics and being aware of the biology and the body was a big part of that. And so thinking about creating change for humans, incorporating what was happening in their biology, in their body, was something that right from the beginning felt like, well, of course. I think I didn't even entertain the idea that it could be otherwise.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. So, yeah, it's always been on your radar then. So I think, I don't know, I remember when I got into coaching, I think I came across quite a lot of it. And I think at the time, maybe it was my age or just background, upbringing, or whatever, I just thought it was all a bit woo-woo. And I think anything like that, I just thought, no, that's not what I'm about. I think I was very much this, top-down approach, like, how do people think? And yeah, maybe feelings as well. But it was very much, I don't know, I didn't even clock what was going on in the body. I suppose that's why it feels like such a revelation for me now, having coached people for so long and thought there's something else going on here. So many other blockers. So yeah, as I say, it sounds like for you, it's always been, as you say, like common sense and second nature almost to bring that into your work.
Yeah, and it's interesting on two folds. Number one, I think there is so much kind of woo-woo-ness around our body. It feels quite separate to what we do in our everyday life. And something that I try to do and try to communicate also in the course that we did together is that we're all living in a body. We're all having physical experiences every day. And so how do we reclaim the awareness of our physicality, and is the first thing. And the second thing is that I think we all grow up having somatic experiences in dancing, in playing in sprinklers, in the way we just inhabit our bodies. And we almost get trained out of that, right, by formal education, at least in the West.
Sit down
and the academic and, only go to the toilet at these times or eat your food at those times. And so we're almost trained out of body awareness from quite an early age. So it does feel quite different to almost notice the body or include the body in our experience of being humans.
Well, funny you should say that, because interestingly, like with my son's school, I don't know, I suppose with the prevalence of things like ADHD, it's like they've become more aware of the body, and they now give the kids like movement breaks, and it's not so frowned upon to have like fidget toys and, stretch your arms out, stand up while you're writing and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting that maybe it's becoming, a bit more accommodated for, but nowhere near the level that maybe it could be or should be. Anyway, yeah. Side note, I just thought that was quite interesting. Okay, so I suppose it might be helpful actually if we explain what somatic coaching is. So if you were to put it in your words, how would you describe it?
So somatic modalities are around including the soma, which is the body, right? Including awareness of the body in the work that we're doing. And so when we think about the body, we think about, well, where are the places that I hold tension? Or how am I breathing? Or what is my state like? What are the sensations in my stomach? And being aware of maybe what's happening to us on a less cognitive level. So when we talk about somatic coaching, we're talking about an awareness of changes of state, of senses, and accessing those both to harvest information about what's happening to us in that moment and as resources for us to use to support ourselves going forward. So it's an awareness of the body, an awareness of the nervous system, an awareness of what's happening to us on a less conscious level.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's, I suppose, through quite traditional forms of coaching, it's the idea that like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or coaching, it's this idea that if you change your thoughts, then change might be brought about, behavior might change, but it also goes the other way as well. It's this sort of sense that, well, maybe it's your body that are driving the thoughts. And if the body's not being paid attention to, then it's quite hard to change those pattern of thought. So it's this sort of bottom-up approach of where, okay, we'll change what's going on in the system and the body, and being aware of how maybe that changes your thoughts and your ability to change behavior and achieve your goals and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So when I think about coaching, we're often supporting people to interrupt habitual patterns, right? And so habitual patterns of how do we think? How do we feel? What are we doing? And so, there's an approach that is, oh, well, the place that we interrupt that is the cognition, is the thinking, is the beliefs. And if we start with that, then that will create change throughout the body. And when we think about a somatic approach, or a bottom up, as you call it, or we sometimes call it in the industry, is if we shift our state, if we shift our biology, if we speak to the body in the body's language, we will create change in the way that we feel, and we will then be able to create change in the way that we interpret the way that we feel, right, in our rational mind. So really interesting to think of these two things working together. They're not separate to each other. We can look at creating change in lots of different ways. But traditionally, in kind of talk therapy, we almost ignore and negate the body's experience, right? And we focus solely on the mind. How do we expand that view to invite people to have more aspects, more avenues to create change and interrupt patterns for themselves?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, because even in like coaching and therapy, again, you just traditionally walk into the room, sit down on a chair and talk. And it feels quite unique actually if then you're asking somebody to get up and move their arms around or that sort of thing. So yeah, it can feel quite strange to start with. And you said there the rational mind, and that just made me think of, for me, like a lot of clients when they're contemplating a career change, it's like they get a bit stuck in the rational mind. And from what I understand, a lot of what sometimes goes on in the body and with the nervous system, that can all be subconscious. And they might not even be aware that we'll go into the different states of the nervous system, but they might not even be aware of some of what's going on. I assume that's accurate, right?
Absolutely. And so I think, framing the awareness of the body, or, fancy psychological speak for that, is interoception. So what is my awareness of my felt sense, of my experience, of my body, of my soma, right? And seeing that as a practice in and of itself of how do I maybe pause every now and notice what is happening in my muscles, what's happening in my tension, what sensations are here in my body. That's something we're often quite disconnected from. And so when we are making big decisions, or when we're in thinking, or when we're researching job opportunities, we are spending quite a lot of time in our thinking, and we're often quite disconnected from, well, how does my body feel right now? What is my nervous system state? What is my physical being doing at the same time? And what is that telling me about maybe the different opportunities that I have, or how is that affecting the way that I'm thinking about these, or the decisions that I'm making?
Well, and so you can tell I'm still learning all these terms. So there's introception. And then I came across neuroception, which is how, I know this is probably not as relevant for career change, but how like our nervous systems basically read each other's.
Absolutely.
Yeah, our little sort of spidery senses, I guess, which I just always find so interesting, because, like when you meet somebody and you just immediately feel, I don't know, something's a bit off, or you're a bit wary of them, or maybe even, I don't know, it could relate to career change as well. But I just think that's so cool that we have these sort of built-in systems that are constantly scanning for danger and threat and everything like that. And again, it's all going on subconsciously if you're not that tuned into it.
Absolutely. And I think, for me, there's always this moment of like gratitude and appreciation for all our complex systems and what they're doing at any given moment. So the fact that we have parts of us that can be scanning around and looking what feels safe, what feels dangerous, what do I need to orient to, what do I need to be aware of, by checking social cues or nonverbal behavior. I think that relates hugely to career change on a couple of levels. When I think about walking into an interview room or being on a Zoom call with different people that are talking to me, acknowledging that requires a lot of energy, not just on a conscious, what am I going to answer in the question moment, or how am I presenting in the interview, but also that my body will be looking for cues around what feels good, what doesn't, what's safe and what isn't. So that's one piece of what am I picking up. But the other piece is that because of this neuroception, other people are doing that at the same time. So what are they picking up from me, right? What state are they noticing in me? What is my nonverbal body behavior? So when I think about social cues and regulation and bringing calm to ourselves, bringing that energy into an interview, that's also something really important to think about. Everybody's a social animal. Everybody is going to be scanning for threat or danger or what works well. And so that goes both ways, this prediction that nervous systems are making.
Yeah, definitely. Well, then if it sort of highlights the importance of trying to be as regulated as you can be in an interview. Otherwise, you might come across as, I don't know, it could be lacking confidence, or they just feel you're not quite right for the role for some reason because you're in a kind of heightened, agitated state, and the interviewer reads that in a way as you not being, as I say, confident or that kind of thing. So yeah, it's an important point to try and work on your own state, which then, talking about state, so give us a little bit of an overview of the nervous system. I think I touched on this in a previous episode with a neuroscientist, but it's quite interesting just to recap on it. Yeah, let's start there. So how would you summarize the nervous system for anyone who's kind of new to it all?
Quite something to have to follow a neuroscientist.
Well, she sort of talked about it more in terms of the brain, but obviously it's similar language that you use for the different states. But Yeah. How would you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love to think about the body being this complex network of nerves. And I think we know more now than we ever have before about all of the interconnection that our body is doing and the speaking to each other through the fascia, through the nerves, through the kind of the hormones and the indicators within our bodies. So when we think about our body looking around or noticing or taking in, our brain processing, our gut acknowledging, our nervous system picking up cues from context and surroundings, and then translating that into, are we safe or are we not safe? What is our response on a physical level? What needs to happen here? What do we need to get ready for? And so when I think about the categories there, I think a lot of people are familiar with the terms of fight or flight. So an activated nervous system, where our sympathetic nervous system, so the part of our nervous system that is saying, get ready for action, get ready for mobilization, get ready to do something, is heightened, is active. Many of us are also very familiar with the kind of category of freeze, right? The parasympathetic nervous system, or the slowing down, the overwhelm, the kind of play dead image that we have of a nervous system that has been overwhelmed and has frozen, that is now in numbness or in disconnection because of an overload of danger and threat signals. So the underlying system that is looking for cues from a context and translating that into bodily responses is how I would describe the nervous system to somebody who isn't so aware of what might be happening on a less conscious level.
So anxiety is that heightened, agitated fight or flight state. And then rabbit in headlights, that's more the freeze state. Yeah,
rabbit in headlights, exhaustion, shutdown, depression. When we think about those states, there's less energy there. There's kind of my whole body kind of like sags as I say that, right? There's a heaviness to that. It's almost like the stress hormones have been used up and we're now at the end of that. When I think about some of my clients, something like adrenal fatigue, actually on a biological level, is something that they might describe themselves as having.
So burnout, that I suppose, is that almost the result of just being in that fight or flight for so long and then it just simply collapses and burnout and there's just nothing left?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so when we think about, again, we talked about these 3 levels of change that we look to create in the coaching industry or in change work with humans. We think about the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And when I think about, the physical changes that happen, we're talking about low immune system. We're talking about exhaustion. We're often talking about chronic tension. When we're talking on a level of burnout or freeze at the end of the cycle. And obviously there's stages towards that, there are phases towards that. It doesn't happen overnight. It usually is, there's activation, there's tension, there's anxiety, there's different ways of thinking, there's racing thoughts, there's overwhelm, there's I'm not able to sleep before we get to the phase of absolute freeze, collapse, the end of the line.
And what's your experience of trying to coach people in that space when they're looking to set and achieve goals, but if they're in that real kind of burnout state?
So when I think about the work that I do around preventing or recovering from burnout, the first phase of that is often looking at practices to support baseline health. So where is our sleep at? Where is our nutrition at? Where is our movement at? Where are the practices that enable safety in the body and that create some level of energy before we're even looking at creating change within a workplace. So often when I'm working around stress management, when I'm working in burnout prevention, I'd say the first 2 months of our work together is resetting or looking at supporting baseline biological health.
Yeah, to get you into a position where you're even resourceful enough to think about change.
Absolutely.
Because I remember on the course, and I've read a little bit about it, the window of tolerance and how, you have that kind of heightened fight or flight at the top, the freeze sort of burnout state at the bottom. And then ideally, sorry, I'm skipping all over the place, but it was the acknowledgement that naturally we skip through these three different states, the middle one being a kind of baseline place of resourcefulness. So it is acknowledging that we naturally skip through these on a very regular basis, but that, yes, ideally these practices then pull you into that middle bit of the window where there's resilience, as I say, resourcefulness and creativity and, all the good stuff that comes with being human.
Yeah, so two things that I'm thinking about as you're speaking. One is this permission for humans to have different states, right? The goal is not robots, for me to be exactly like a one-tone Zen master. That's not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for the capacity to, number one, acknowledge where I am, right? Identify that interoception piece. Do I know what I'm feeling? Do I know how I am? Do I know what's going on for me? And have I trained that piece of me? Have I practiced that? Do I practice pausing every now and then and checking in? Am I hungry? Do I need a glass of water? Am I tired? What might I need? Which is a huge piece. We say it like it's easy, but actually a lot of us are working through a lot of things and are often on autopilot when it comes to how we're doing internally. So number one is, do I know where I'm at? And number two is, do I have practices that allow me to come back to safety? Do I have times in my day where I digest my stress, where I come back to something that feels good in my nervous system, that feels resourced for me? And again, when we are stressed, often those practices, the walk around the block or the stopping to sniff the flowers or the sitting on the cushion for a meditation practice, those are often the first things that go, right? When we have a lot of things on our to-do list. And so identifying where we are and having practices that help us to come back to a place that feels safe and comfortable are really, really useful, particularly in times of high change, as you're talking about career changes, making big decisions about the work that we do in a life, to be able to come back to something where we feel we are safe and we have capacity, or as Dan Siegel calls it, the window of tolerance, the kind of the green area in the middle is a constant checking in with ourselves.
Yeah, constant practice. Well, and from my own experience, weirdly, I think maybe people can relate to this. Like, I spend quite a lot of time in a heightened state. I think maybe since my son was born, I think I've been this sort of hypervigilant parent. And it's almost like coming into that green middle bit almost feels unsafe. It takes a lot to actually, I don't know, sit through that. I know when I started meditation, and I don't know, it's like it's such a protective strategy, right? You're scanning and you're in this sort of height looking for danger or whatever. It then almost feels unsafe to come out of that, weirdly. Is that like a thing?
Absolutely. It's interesting because I often joke with my one-on-one clients around comfort being uncomfortable for them, right? There's something about the normal, the default, perhaps being in a state of vigilance, in a state of tension, in a state of stress, in a state of speed. And actually slowing down or creating change in that can bring up some worry about, are we still going to be able to achieve everything? Are we still safe? Are we still doing our best for everybody else? And so it's big work on both the biological and a cognitive level to identify, well, what is coming up for me around that? And is that true? And how do I experiment with practices that allow my nervous system to regulate a little bit or allow my stress to digest a little bit? And I often, when I'm working with people with really busy brains, really busy nervous systems, often starting with movement practices feels easier than starting with very slow practices or stationary practices, right? So actually having something to focus on or moving or starting with walking around the block feels more attainable than sitting on a cushion for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I suppose there's a lot of energy there already. So it makes sense that you would start with those movement exercises. Well, I love that one that we did in the course. It was, and you put on Taylor Swift, Shake It Off, and you kind of like, so yeah, you kind of you sort of start with your fingers and you eventually just shake your arms out and then your legs and your bodies. And it was so effective because I think you store all this energy and there's just so effort to go. So yeah, that was a super helpful one.
And just to put in a little point here about, just bringing this into the practical, I think that shaking exercise that we talked about, if anyone who's listening wants to think about how they could implement that in their lives, we did that for a song. So 2 or 3 minutes, stand up and shake your body. That's something you can often do before a big call that you have or afterwards or in between your day. I think a lot of people, when they think about creating change in their lifestyle or implementing movement practices, they feel almost overwhelmed at that, particularly if they are themselves already stressed, already have a lot of things to do. So thinking about how can I make this bite-sized? Can I stand up and stretch in between a call? Can I stand up and shake my body after every meeting? That in and of itself allows your body to discharge a little bit of that tension. And it's not a big heavy lift. It's not a 3-hour practice. So maybe that's something to take away and start to experiment with.
Definitely. And if you're about to maybe sit down and do your career change research or your homework, if you want to get into a good place mentally for that, a quick exercise like that can be super helpful. Something I was going to say earlier when we were talking about the heightened states is it's so easy just to sort of get into that habit and that pattern, and it just becomes a bit of a default. So those sorts of practices can just interrupt those patterns and just shift you into a much more helpful mindset, I would say. So movement practices, what other little practices do you think are helpful for people that are maybe looking to change their nervous system state?
So I feel like these practices are things that we all know are good for us, and we just forget to do them because they're almost too simple. So, we talked about the shaking practice a few minutes ago, standing up and dancing to a song. You're all behind the screens. We can't see you now, standing up and dancing. Nobody's watching. Really interesting British Medical Journal article came out in 2025 around the health benefits of dancing and comparing that to SSRIs and antidepressants and seeing the efficacy of actually dancing, daily dancing.
Amazing. Well, then it makes sense, doesn't it? But again, even that, I don't know about other people, but even that feels like for me to just close the shutters, put some music on and dance, that feels like a I don't know, there's like a hesitation, a reservation, because it's just so out of my routine and the norm of my daily existence, I suppose. So it's almost, you know, I wonder what that kind of mental leap is to just say, yeah, sod it, let's just put the music on and dance. Like, I don't know. It's kind of humans are weird, right?
Humans are weird should be the theme for a podcast somewhere.
I think it is.
Yeah, a couple of things that I'm thinking about there is, number one, a lot of people, you know, when they look back at the moments where they feel in their body, where they feel free, where they feel like they're having fun, they have some kind of experience of dance, you know. So maybe that's clubbing in their 20s, or maybe that's dancing as a child. Yeah. There's something there about a memory, a lived experience of dancing that might be helpful to tap into. The second one that I love to think about is how humans have been dancing through all of time, right? When we think about, you know, I'm from South Africa, and Cape Town, you can see amazing rock art of people dancing thousands and thousands of years ago, dancing in community. So for me, there's also something about tapping into something that's very natural for human beings. And the third one is a place that people often find it easier to start is kitchen dancing, you know, maybe with the family, or at the end of a workday, we all put on a song and we get a little bit silly and do that together. And that can be a fun, low pressure way of starting some kind of a dance end of the day transition before we go into maybe parenting or caregiving or whatever the end of the day might entail. So dancing is a great one. Shaking is a great one. Mindful walking is a great one, right? So putting your shoes on, going for a 20-minute walk at lunchtime, stepping away from the desk, being in nature, smelling the smells that are out there, listening to whatever you might be listening to. So tapping into the senses and moving the body gently is a really nice, attainable movement practice that people can often incorporate into their day. And then something as simple as taking a big slow breath or sighing every now and then, right? The breath work that we also spoke about on the certificate of where can I let the body know in its language, it's safe for me to take a long, slow, deep breath, right?
You're making me do one now. I find it quite nerve-wracking recording these podcasts. So yeah, it's always such a helpful reminder. Well, my family are constantly saying to me, "Oh, why do you sigh so much?" So I didn't even know that I do, but it's just my system regulating itself. So yeah, I obviously do it quite automatically, but it's great to do it really intentionally as much as possible as well. And some of those, so I've come across like box breathing. So that's where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. And is that supposed to be quite a calming one, or is that more of a energizing one?
So that's quite a calming breath. The other one that is quite good for calming is a double inhale and a long, slow exhale. So whenever we're looking at calming, we're looking at breathing through the nose, and we're looking at extending our exhale. So taking a long, slow exhale. When we're looking to create energy, so maybe we're wanting to activate ourselves a little bit, maybe before an important call, and we're looking to kind of boost ourselves up with a little bit of oxygen, we're looking at mouth breathing, and we're looking at extending the inhale, so more air in. So for those people who do yoga, maybe it's more like a lion breath, or a sipping air in multiple times. So that's quite helpful to know. What are we looking to do? Are we looking to soften, calm, extended exhales, breathing through the nose, or are we looking to energize ourselves, in which case maybe more mouth breathing and more emphasis on the inhale?
All right. Interesting. Yeah, and it makes sense because when you're, I don't know, like running or whatever, you're taking in a lot more breath. And then, so just go back to the mindful walking. So I came across that really helpful tool where is you tune into the different senses. So you think about, right, what's one thing that I can see? What's one thing that I can hear? One thing I can smell? One thing I can taste? Is there 5?
And the other one is feel. So what do I feel on my skin? What might the temperature be? Is there wind? So kind of tapping into the present moment through the senses. Yeah.
Yeah, just to ground yourself, be present and come back to that particular moment. And then the other one that we looked at in the course is visualizations. And actually that's kind of how I became really interested in this. So in the career change program that I do, there's a particular session where we do a visualization where people sort of meet their confident self in, them in 10 years from now, and they ask them questions about their career change and that kind of thing. And it's one of those exercises that really stays with people. I think because it's so out of their comfort zone, maybe they've not done anything like that before. And because there's such power in this whole approach, as we've talked about, they're so in their heads all the time that actually just 10 minutes of calming their nervous system, they get in touch with the side that they just didn't know existed or maybe forgot existed. So yeah, I think I just really thought, wow, there's some real benefits there. Do you know much about why they're so beneficial, those visualizations?
So when I think about visualizations, I did a deep dive into why they are useful back when I first heard about them, because they do have a bit of an aura of the woo-woo around them.
Yeah, I have to really contract around them and say, this is what I do. Are you up for trying that kind of thing? And even then, it's a bit of a curveball. So yeah, for sure.
And I think for anyone who is feeling a little bit of doubt around that, I think really useful to know that there's a lot of evidence and research around how useful they are. And a lot of high profile sports people, athletes in general, peak performers use visualizations as part of their toolkit for preparing themselves for events. And so when we think about tapping into our imagination, tapping into our creativity, tapping into our less conscious as resources to create pictures in our mind and to allow our brain to almost future play what it would be like to live that, and that we might be able to survive it and create safety around the future situation is so, so helpful. And it works with the reticular activation system within the brain, which is always looking to filter out what is good for us, what isn't, what do we need to pay attention to, what is not. So it's part of that kind of neuroception piece. And so we are actually really intelligently working with the filtration system in our brain to create those pictures and say, how would it be to live this? How would it be to create this? Could we survive this? What would this look like? And we're priming ourselves to then see that in our 3D reality. So it's a really powerful tool to use. And at this stage in 2026, we have a lot of empirical evidence-based research behind it as a strategy to support us move towards the things that we want.
That's really, really interesting. Yeah, because I think a lot of, especially with career change, is encouraging you to acknowledge that you can survive it, that you can cope whatever happens. Like so many of the fears that I hear, it's around, well, what if I don't like it? What if it's a mistake? What if I don't make any money? What if this? What if that? And then so much of the discussion is around, well, even if those things happened, you'd be okay, you'd be safe. So interesting that the visualizations can help people just tap into that and acknowledge what it would be like to survive maybe a challenging chapter, and acknowledge that maybe they've survived a fair few challenging chapters in the past. And their nervous systems
Absolutely.
were probably freaking out at that point, but they still made it through.
And how powerful to bring together those three threads, right? When we think about, yes, let's intellectually think about the change and make decisions and maybe look at our budget and think about our resources and what could we do. Let's emotionally play out that scenario by picturing it. Let's use our imagination to creatively create that picture. And then let's work with our biology to resource ourselves to feel safe as we are taking those decisions or having difficult conversations or doing our LinkedIn research or thinking about money. And so when we think about doing all of those things at the same time, that's a full body immersion into something new, into creating change. And I think that's where the power really multiplies, right? When we are working on all of those levels of change together with our clients. That's the work that I love to do.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, within career change, those somatic practices, as you say, can help you regulate, which in turn then helps you feel safe to navigate any change that comes your way. But it's hard to do that if you're in this sort of agitated, heightened state all the time. Because then you won't feel safe, and then your body's going to be telling you, don't do it, don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And two things that I think are interesting there is, number one, the more stressed we are, the more threat we perceive. So when I think about, stress reducing the activity in our prefrontal cortex and increasing activity in the amygdala, increasing like things are dangerous, things are stressful. So it's almost that perpetuating cycle of, if I'm stressed, I perceive more threat. If I perceive more threat, I am more stressed, I am more activated. And so where do we interrupt to take an exhale, slow ourselves down so that we can make decisions from a state that is calmer, that is able to think more creatively, that is able to decide, that is able to access the logic and the experiences that we have. When we're in that heightened state, it's very difficult to access our thinking. And so, a lot of people that I meet that are in career changes are really nervous, anxious, refreshing emails, and coming back to that baseline health can be so supportive in accessing quality of thought, quality of thinking, quality of decision making.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think because when you're really stressed and anxious, that creativity goes offline as well. So, a lot of people say, I don't know what I want to do. I don't have any ideas. It's like they're stuck, as you say. They can't access the kind of resourceful, creative side of their brain to think about ideas and what's possible. That just kind of goes offline when you're really stressed and agitated. I'm just reading, I think I said to you before, I was just reading that book, The Body Keeps the Score. And the images of the brain scans, I mean, obviously that's about trauma and stress, very different categories. But it just highlights that if your brain is under a lot of stress, it just goes offline, parts of it. So it's just so important to get it back online to then think of options and possibilities and to even sort of see yourself in a helpful way to navigate all of that.
Yeah, it's so impactful when you can see the images, which we have access to these days with the advances of medicine, to be able to see what's actually happening to us in our brains is incredible. And I think the one thing that I'd want to add here is, and from my experience, and I'm curious to hear yours, is the financial piece is such a huge piece of safety for people, right? Of how am I going to cope financially? And so I often find it really useful to also think about that as a piece of what the nervous system often needs to feel safe, right? It's one thing to do all the beautiful movement practices, but if we're not sure that we're going to be able to provide for ourselves, it's really difficult to come to any kind of safety. So yes to breathing, yes to dancing, yes to shaking, but also yes to making an Excel like budget and tracking your finances and knowing where that's at, because that's often a fundamental piece of the context that we're in and what our system is responding to.
Definitely. Well, and I think it's good to get down to the detail of it as well, because I think sometimes you can feel safe on less than you think. I think in our heads or our bodies or whatever, we think it needs to be quite a lot. But sometimes it's not about the amount as well. It's about the regularity of it. You know, to be self-employed, that can feel quite unsafe. I was doing a bit of work on my own attitudes towards money, and I don't know, I think there was something about COVID that made my nervous system feel quite unsafe around money. I think maybe just because of the impact of it all when you're self-employed. So I've had to do quite a bit of work on just, reframing what feels safe to me around money. So as I say, and as you say, I think it's helpful to look at it in a bit more detail, because it might be not as much as you think. You never know. So, okay. Wow. Fascinating. I could talk about this for days, but it has been, has been about now. But no, that's been so helpful. What are your sort of summarizing thoughts on our discussion?
So when I think about somebody listening to this, I think about acknowledging that your body is always trying to do its best to keep you safe. And I think about maybe paying attention to and making sure that you include practices around baseline biological health as part of whatever else you're doing. Whatever that might be, whether that's a job search or interviewing or coaching or thinking about things. What are your practices around creating goodness and nourishment and nutrition for your biological state so that you can move forward from that place, regardless of what's happening?
Yeah. Back to basics. Yeah,
always.
I love that. I don't know if you've seen those reels on Instagram where the voiceovers sort of, I feel awful today and I'm really not sure why. And then they say, okay, did you get 8 hours sleep? No. Have you been outside? Okay. No. Have you eaten nutritious, healthy food? No. Have you avoided caffeine? No. And it's just like, oh, maybe that's why. Maybe that's why I feel on edge. So back to basics. Yeah, because the career change, especially the people I coach, often it is quite a drastic change. So back to basics to get yourself into a place of resourcefulness to take all that on can be super helpful. And that's why I really love.
And I think the basics are often simple but challenging, right? Because the basics often require boundaries. They require time. They require energy. They require thinking, how do I think about myself? How do I relate to my own value? How do I value my own health? And so, they're basics or they're fundamentals, but they often feel really difficult for people, particularly at times of high stress and transition. So I love this reminder of, what are the things that we could be doing to create that baseline to be moving from at all times. Yeah.
Well, and start small with it as well. Some of the things that you've said today, they can just be tiny little things that you can do in those difficult moments. And who knows, maybe in time they become more habitual. Great. Well, thank you so much, Maude. It's been fascinating as usual and super helpful and informative. And I hope that, people listening can take some of that on board. If people wanted to follow up with you afterwards, where can they find you?
They can find me at my website, and I'll provide the link to that below. I am also active on LinkedIn, and I do have an Instagram profile where I'm not super active, but people can find me there.
Okay. And your website address, what's that, just for people listening?
www.coachingwithmaude.com. And there's quite a nice resource there around the phases of burnout. So for anyone who's listening and feeling like, oh, maybe I'm on the way there, that is something quite useful to check out. And the other one, which might be the other resource that I'm thinking about for the people that are working with you, is around imposter syndrome and the relationship to context and how we can support ourselves through that. That might also be a helpful resource. Both of those are available on the website.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. All right. Well, hopefully stay in touch, and I'll speak to you soon anyway. But thank you again, and all the best.
Such a pleasure. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Bye.